Welcome once again. As individuals are joining us today, we will begin the program. And my name is Andrew Hone, President and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, which is Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce. And thank you for being here today for our November forum. And also a thanks and gratitude for all your patience and grace as we need to transition this discussion to a virtual format. And we really do look forward to the opportunity to get back in person in our forum next month. This morning, we have a great discussion planned for you, and I want to acknowledge that none of this would be possible without the support of our sponsors. So thank you to our forum series sponsors, KeyBank and the Portland Tribune. Joining us today are Jason McCleskey from KeyBank and Mark Arbor from the Portland Tribune. Welcome, Jason, and welcome, Mark. And now we invite our sponsors to provide some remarks. So Jason, let's start with you.
Great, thank you, Andrew. As Andrew mentioned, my name is Jason McCleskey, and I'm a senior area retail leader for KeyBank. We were so close to an in-person meeting, but here we are virtually, safe and sound. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge the hard behind-the-scenes work that Portland Business Alliance put in over the past many months to ensure that we could meet, even when we weren't in person. They pivoted quickly and kept these engaging programs going throughout the pandemic. So on behalf of all of us, thank you, Portland Business Alliance. And thank you, members, for joining us today for what is sure to be a lively discussion about an important topic that really impacts us all. Public safety is, of course, a crucial concern for us at KeyBank. We care deeply about the safety of our families, colleagues, clients, and the larger community. And of course, let's face it, we're a bank and there are many public safety issues related to our workplace. We all know the story of what Willie Sutton said when asked why he robbed banks. He said, "That's where the money is." But today, fraudsters can find money in many places other than the bank. It's why we at KeyBank take fraud prevention seriously and work with our clients to safeguard their hard-earned money and help keep them alert to potential scams that are becoming increasingly prevalent. Public safety involves a wide variety of potential elements, of which fraud is obviously just one. But it's an example of how we all have a role in doing our part to keep Portland's citizens safe. For us, that entails fraud, but many others here today are addressing mental or physical safety. In the realm of public safety, it truly takes a village. And now let's turn our attention to the panel that Portland Business Alliance has assembled today. I know we all will gain new perspectives from their insights. Andrew, I'll turn it back to you.
The Portland Tribune is also here today. Thank you so much for making this possible. I'd like to welcome Mark Arbor to join us and provide some remarks. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. And as Jason did, I also want to say thanks to the Portland Business Alliance. I know we all wanted to be in person today, and I was looking forward to seeing everyone's faces after a couple of years of not doing so, but I know we'll get there eventually. And the PBA staff has just been so great in pivoting from physical to virtual, and I've just been genuinely impressed. And you're helping to keep us all informed on these issues. The Pamphlet Media Group, our mission actually is to build strong communities through great local journalism. And one of the ways we do that is, one of the many ways we do that is through forums like this, where we attend them and report on them. To that end, we have two reporters in the audience today, Jim Redden and Joseph Gallivan. And they'll gather information from this forum and spread that to a much wider audience through our print editions, our websites, our social media, our email newsletters, and then they'll gather ideas for future stories. So it is a way to keep the community informed and to make a stronger community. I would add too that through our interaction with our readers, there's probably no bigger issue than the one that we're going to talk about this morning, and that's for the entire Portland metro area. Not just the city of Portland, but the issue of safety, the bigger issue of safety is right up there with COVID and the local economy in terms of what's on people's minds. So I'm also very much looking forward today to the panel discussion and hoping to learn new things about what's planned. So Andrew, I'll toss it back to you as well.
Thank you so much, Mark. And again, to both KeyBank and for the Portland Tribune, thank you for making this entire series possible. We appreciate it, and it makes these important conversations possible for our staff and our team and for all of our members. And today's discussion is focused on the importance of public safety. As some may say, Portland is at a crossroads, and Portland's ongoing struggles with community safety are well documented. Personal and property crimes have steadily increased. So what is the plan for restoring community safety in Portland? Does the city have the resources necessary to help? Well, we have a great group of panelists today to discuss this. I first would like to provide Mayor Ted Wheeler with an opportunity to speak on this topic and provide his perspective on where Portland is at with public safety. And while Mayor Wheeler had a last-minute scheduling conflict, he didn't want to miss out on sharing a few thoughts. And here are the mayor's recorded remarks before we get into this panel.
Good morning. I'm Mayor Ted Wheeler. I want to begin by thanking the Portland Business Alliance for hosting this breakfast forum. Finding real, holistic solutions to address public safety has been a top priority for me and my administration since day one. As you may have heard, I recently announced my proposals for the fall budget monitoring process, which will be discussed in Council this week. This year, the City Budget Office has presented an historic $62 million surplus of funds that can be allocated to address urgent, immediate investments in houselessness, economic prosperity, livability, and public safety. This builds on the tens of millions of dollars that the city has already invested during the spring bump, the fiscal year 2021 through 2022 adopted budget, and of course the federal CARES and American Rescue Plan resources. The city of Portland is suffering from the worst rate of gun violence in the city that we have ever seen. We've passed the historic threshold of 70 homicides and have had over 1,000 shootings this year alone. Portland's our home, and we've been working on a plan to address this growing issue. My plan for restoring community safety begins with what I like to call my 3R plan: reform, refocus, and rehire. Refocus looks to broaden and strengthen the city's responses to calls for safety. This includes expanding the 311 non-emergency program and the Portland Street response. Reform looks to support efforts for reforming policies and practices to rebuild trust and accountability. This includes funding for body-worn cameras and hiring a dean of police education and training. Rehire supports increasing staff members at the Portland Police, especially the civilian police force. This includes programs like Retire Rehire, an initiative to allow officers who've recently retired or will soon be retiring the option to come back and fill a critical need. It also supports adding public safety support specialists, which allow us to have officers who specialize in the many nonviolent types of calls that PPB responds to. I'm also proposing a 5-year staffing plan that'll be led by the Community Safety Division. This work will be focused on an evidence-based recommendation on staffing levels for the Bureau in the long term. After this fall bump, I'll continue to prioritize public safety in upcoming budget processes and advocate for solutions that will make Portland safer for everyone. However, I know we can't do this alone. Forums like this one today from the Portland Business Alliance allow leaders from our city to work together through tough issues. Your input's critically important. The only way we can restore community safety in Portland is by working together. Again, I'd like to thank the Portland Business Alliance and all of you who've joined us this morning for an important forum on public safety. Together, we can make Portland safer. Thank you.
Thank you to Mayor Wheeler. And I just want to remind everyone here that we will have a moderated discussion today, and then the opportunity, if we have time, to take questions from all of you who are in attendance. We encourage you to drop your questions into the Q&A function, especially as you hear the conversation progress today, so that if we have time, we can get to them after the moderated discussion. So thank you to Mayor Wheeler. And now I'd like to introduce today's moderator. Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, the City Hall reporter with the Oregonian. Shane, it's so good to see you. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Andrew Hone, and everyone. Welcome to today's November Forum. It's too bad we can't do it in person, them's the breaks, but I still think we're going to have a fantastic discussion on public safety this morning. So let's get into this panel discussion. Joining us today, we have Acting U.S. Attorney Scott Ospog, Robin Burke, Program Manager with the Portland Street Response, Portland Police Bureau Chief Chuck Lavell, and Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Welcome, everyone. So let's start this discussion with diving into the data a little bit more. We know that crime rates, particularly gun violence, shootings, homicides, are up here in Portland and in cities across the country. But I want to hear more about what other types of crimes we've seen the greatest jump in the past 2 years, and also where we've seen decreases. So Chief Lavell, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, thanks, Shane. You know, I was really looking at the numbers in the last year or so, and you know, the biggest rise that we're seeing right now is really around motor vehicle theft and theft of motor vehicle parts, in particular catalytic converters. It's been well documented, the rise that we've had in shootings and homicides. We are about 65% over the year prior in homicides, and we're trending right now to be about double what we normally would see for shootings. So, I mean, those are the big ones that we're seeing right now. Some crimes that are down, shoplifting, down about 3% in the last year. Burglary is actually down, which I think would surprise some people, about 7% in the last year. And the topic of robberies comes up a lot, and we're up about 9% in robberies. And simple assaults are actually down for the year, which I think might surprise some people as well. And those are down about 5%. We're typically a city that sees a lot of property crime and less around violent crime.
So, I mean, clarify that a little bit more, Chief Lavell. So what I'm hearing from you is that property crimes are not appearing to be as high as some may think at this moment?
The ones around vehicles, we're seeing a sharp spike in vehicle thefts, theft of vehicle parts. Those are the biggest rises that we've seen. Aggravated assaults are up about 26% in the last year. Those are the big changes. We have some restraining order violations up about 20%, and vandalisms are up about 14% in the last 12 months.
All right, thank you. And DA Schmidt, can you tell us a little bit more about sort of the crime trends that you're seeing in your office?
Yeah, thank you, Shane. And first of all, thanks again to the Alliance and the sponsors and the folks tuning in to join us here today, as well as my colleagues on the panel. You know, things that we're seeing here in the District Attorney's Office. Let me kind of get started from where I started, which was last August. You know, we were in the midst, my first day in office was day 60 of political protests going on in response to the George Floyd murder. And this has been a really trying past year, obviously. So one of the things that we have seen as an increase and now happily a decrease has been political violence. Acts of destruction and damage to property, to persons around and involving political violence. And I distinguish that from protest, because protest is something that, you know, we should be engaged in. We have a rich history in this country of protesting in civil rights demonstrations, but political violence is not acceptable. And we saw a huge increase in that. Happily, you know, we've worked hand in hand with Portland Police Bureau and others, and we've seen that political violence decrease. I was just talking to one of my senior deputy district attorneys who tried and convicted Alan Swinney, a Proud Boy who came into downtown and pulled guns on people in the crowd. He's awaiting his sentencing in December. My same deputy, Nathan Vasquez, many of you probably know Nathan and his work with the neighborhood response team in downtown. went to Indiana and actually apprehended a person who was one of the people who threw Molotov cocktails at police. And we worked with the Indiana Police Department to bring him back to Oregon. He's currently being held federally for charges. So we saw a major increase in political violence, and happily, once we started focusing on the people causing that, we've seen a decrease. My office has brought approximately 150 different felony cases stemming from that type of violence, as well as 50 misdemeanors. So that's been one increase and happily a decrease. Homicides, obviously, we've already touched on that. And as of today, 74 homicides in our community. And what that means for my office in terms of resources and everything else, every time there's a homicide, we have a deputy going out to the scene, whether that's 4 PM or 4 AM. And that has taken quite a toll on just the amount of work that we have to do and quite frankly, time away from families, as it has for first responders and police officers who are also at the scene. So that's obviously a huge increase. And then as we look at what's happening in downtown, I'm also very happy with a grant we received to enhance our strategic prosecution engagement project, which uses data and evidence to kind of figure out who are the people that are really driving outsized amount of the crimes down there, focusing our resources on those individuals, where appropriate, getting them into treatment and services, or where appropriate, bringing prosecutions that result in them no longer committing those crimes. So we've got about 75 cases that unit's working on. So those are some of the drivers that are driving a lot of the workload in our office.
Mr. District Attorney, I was hoping you could also just give us a quick update on what's the status with the courts. Obviously, you're making cases, you're filing charges, but because of COVID, sort of the wheels of the criminal justice system have nearly grounded to a halt for the last 1.5 years. So, cases aren't getting prosecuted or necessarily resolved. So can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, great question, Shane. And again, something that we're seeing nationally. I talk to my colleagues across the country, and this is just ubiquitous. And what we are seeing is because in the last 1.5 years, we've not been able to bring cases to trial. We've seen a really big kind of backlog of cases starting to amass. Obviously, cases are still being referred to our office from police, but the prospect of trial is really the thing that helps to entice people to resolve their cases. If you're never going to go to trial, you really have no incentive to plea your case or to agree to a plea bargain. The longer and longer that you can wait and let that case languish in the system, the more opportunity or chance that evidence or witnesses or victims no longer want to be there. And so if without trial, there's no real incentive to resolve those cases. And so the combination of those two things, cases coming in the front door and without trials, has really been what's caused the backlog of cases we're seeing. Now, happily, in the last couple months, I'd say we are up to probably 4 to maybe 9 trials a week, depending on the week, which obviously is a huge help. So the courts are moving again, juries are coming in. The Chief Justice has implemented, and our local presiding judge has implemented virtual jury selection. So much like we're on Zoom, instead of asking 100 or 200 or 300 people to come into the courthouse for jury selection, that can be done virtually so that a very much smaller number of people can come into the courthouse. So some of those adaptations have allowed us to start the jury trials going again. And we're hopeful that this is just going to be a constant ramp up, so that in the beginning of next year, hopefully we can get back to where we normally, which is around 20 to 30 trials a week. So we're heading in the right direction, but we're still ramping up.
And I just wanted to ask Chief Lavell and DA Schmidt, given this huge backlog in criminal cases, and a lot of defendants are out of custody awaiting trial or prosecution, has either of your offices seen or detected, or is there any way to measure whether or not there have been sort of repeat offenders or cases with individuals whose cases are sort of stalled in courts right now?
I'll start on that. Chief can weigh in. So we don't have that data yet, and that's the kind of data that you're going to want to see after 1 year or 2 years. You kind of allow for people during the pendency of their cases to see whether or not they committed a crime while on pretrial release. But we do know that there are a lot of people on pretrial release. And at the same time, some of the statistics, we see some parts of crime are going up, like gun violence, and others, like some of the property crimes, going down. And that's not just here locally, that's nationally. The FBI data bears that out as well. So Portland's kind of in line with that. And we're just going to have to study and see what was the impact of people being on release. Clearly, some people will commit crimes still will on release, but many will not. So we'll have to look at the data.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with the DA. I don't think we have any hard and fast data on that, but I think anecdotally we do see repeat offenders who are arrested and then who are back out. We deal with on a frequent basis. So we have a housing crisis. We have people on the streets, and we have folks who unfortunately are out and committing crimes to feed addictions and things of that nature. So I think we do see a fair amount of repeat offenders, but I don't think we have any real data that nails that down.
And while this discussion on crime data in particular is really important, it's really interesting, and folks are asking about it. Robin, I wanted to also ask you. I mean, clearly, I think anecdotally, and we all sort of see this around the city of Portland, that there is an increase in people not necessarily committing crimes, but who are experiencing a crisis of one type or another. And I'm wondering if you could share with us what your, what the sort of data with regard to that shows, or what you can tell us about, crisis calls and other things of that nature.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because the majority of calls that Portland Street responds to is somebody calling about another person. Very few calls do we go to where they're calling for themselves for assistance. But when we arrive, usually what we track is it mental health related, substance use related? Is it a physical health ailment, or is it a lack of basic needs? And what we're seeing most of all is a lack of basic needs. It's what's driving a lot of the calls that Portland Street Response is going out to. The majority of the calls that we respond to would be considered welfare check calls. So this is where somebody might be kind of going in and out of traffic, acting a little bit out of sorts, oftentimes may not have like proper clothes, like a jacket or shoes, and the public is calling to have them checked on. Or it could be somebody that seems to be passed out along the sidewalk that needs to be checked on. So I believe about 75% of our call types were welfare checks, which were, I think we diverted about 50% from police that were coming into our area during our pilot time. The rest of the calls tend to be what we would term suspicious person, unwanted person, some trespassing calls. So those are sort of the call categories that we end up responding to.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. So I want to, get into a little bit more about what's potentially driving some of the increases we've seen in crime rates around Portland and Multnomah County, Portland area, the rest of the country. So as as law enforcement are investigating crimes, they're making arrests, supporting victims, and filing charges, I wanted to get a better sense of what are folks seeing, and what does the data tell us about the drivers that are leading to some of these sudden and serious rises in crimes across our community. And Acting U.S. Attorney Osbag, I was hoping you could start.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you to the audience for joining us today. Appreciate the opportunity to share the work that we do here at the U.S. Attorney's Office. As a quick refresher, if I can, we are one of 94 federal districts, and the District of Oregon encompasses the entire state. We have offices in Portland, Eugene, and Medford, and so our portfolio is really the entire state and not solely focused on Portland. We don't have the volume that, say, DA Schmidt has because our federal statutes really reflect the need for some federal nexus. As an example, a robbery, as the chief has noted, the stick up of the local convenience store, that is not a federal crime. But if a stick up takes place at a bank, well, then that's a federal crime because the US government insures banks. Or if the offender is using a weapon, a gun, and is a felon, well, then we have the ability to charge that person with felon in possession because that gun has traveled in interstate commerce. Well, what we've seen this year broadly as affecting violent crime and public safety is, frankly, first of all, PPP staff reductions. The ability of the city of Portland to have an adequate police force has been challenged. I know Chief Lavell has done his best with what he has, but the reality is, and I don't have the numbers exactly today, and I'm sure the chief will give us those, but there is a significant reduction in the force that we expect in Portland, and that would typically be on the street dealing with street crimes that affect all of us. The second, and really focused on retaliatory gun violence, is noted as we are at historic levels of gun violence this year, and retaliatory gang-related gun violence is a big part of that. Dissolving last year, the city's decision to dissolve the gun violence reduction team, the GVRT, that was a blow to law enforcement. They were on the street, they had relationships with the gang members and others, and they were able to really develop intelligence that allowed all of us to monitor and to, frankly, prosecute crimes related to gang violence. And the GVRT was respected by those gang members. And now with that absence, we're seeing the increase in gun crime. I really do want to stop and say, let's look forward. And I applaud the decision of the city today or recently to roll out the focused intervention team, which will, I hope, bring back focus to that specific population of offenders so that we can stop these retaliatory shootings. The other thing that we hear anecdotally, and when I say we, it's federal law enforcement, what we're hearing is also the city's decision to place limits on Portland Police's ability to engage in traffic stops has also had an effect on gun violence in Portland. Specifically, if offenders who are inclined to carry guns know that they're not going to be pulled over for traffic matters, they're going to carry their guns. And as a result, when they cross others or incidents happen, they have their gun on them and they're ready to use it. In the past, with the fear that they might be pulled over by GVRT or others, typically they left their gun at home, and if an incident happened, they had to go home, get it, have that ability to cool down and to rethink of their conduct. And as a result, we believe gun violence has increased as a result of that. The last thing, a couple other things that I want to reflect on is the fact there is a huge increase in drug use here in Portland right now. Many of you have read the article in the Atlantic over the last month talking about methamphetamine. It is a problem and it has caused an increase in crime. And then I really don't want to leave this section until we can talk a little bit about anarchistic crime. This has been a problem in Portland for the last year and a half. We think a relatively small group of anarchists had co-opted the Black Lives Matter movement following the murder of George Floyd. They used that as cover to create damage and destruction in downtown Portland. And it happened again just last month, where more than $500,000 in damage was caused by a relatively small number of anarchists whose only purpose is to really create fear in the downtown and distrust of our really civil society. And the answer is pretty easy. Who wants to come downtown to shop or to be in the downtown core when all of our buildings remain boarded up? But on the other hand, for the business community, who wants to take the risk of taking those boards down if they know that the anarchists could show up over the weekend and cause the kind of damage they did last month? So those are the things that I see as the causes of public safety issues here. And I'm hoping that we can all work together to address those.
DA Schmidt, would you like to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a little bit different attack than the acting U.S. attorney. First of all, I think the question you posed, Shane, is why is this happening is going to be a question that for years and decades is going to be researched. And we see this again across the entire nation. I talked to a district attorney, and Shane, you wrote an excellent article in the paper this past week about staffing levels at the police bureau and put it into national context. I thought that was so helpful. I talked to a district attorney out of Kansas, and Kansas, not known as a liberal bastion, it's a pretty red conservative place. And he tells me that they're experiencing the same things that we're experiencing in terms of homicide rates going up. So I've got colleagues across the country, red, blue, places that enhanced their police bureau funding, decreased the funding. All over the board, we're seeing these types of increases. So I think this is going to be a question that researchers study for some time. But I think there are some commonalities that are obvious across all of the jurisdictions. Obviously, we're in an unprecedented pandemic, and that has shut down services, community programs, the types of pro-social activities that especially young people, getting to be out amongst their friends, those types of things that help keep us safe. If you talk to the chief, he and I have had conversations about seeing how an increase in social media of people attacking each other on social media turning into real life violence in our streets. And I think, when you don't have things like teachers and after school programs and things operating and these types of sports and athletics that have been so constrained, you start to see these situations come up. And so I think those are a lot of the reasons we're seeing this across the country. The acting U.S. attorney didn't mention this, but I know he agrees. The flood of guns on our street right now, gun sales since 2020 increased by 65%. We're seeing a lot of those guns trickle into the hands of people that should not have them. So I think there's just kind of a tinderbox of effects of different things that the pandemic has laid bare. I'd also be remiss not to say that a lot of the policies and things that we've done historically, I see have come home to roost in terms of, hollowing out communities. When I look at cases on a regular basis and you look at somebody's criminal history or you look into who they are, you see that they are a child whose parent was at one time incarcerated. They themselves are victims of crime. You see that some of our policies of the past have really hollowed out communities, especially communities of color, which is where we are disproportionately seeing this massive increase in gun violence. So I think it's also incumbent upon us not to just ask, how do we get back to the way things were, but how do we learn the lessons of the past year, move forward, and not repeat the mistakes of the past. So those are, some of the things that I think are causing it. But again, just looking at Portland and our homicide rates, the mayor brought it up in his comments that, we've hit a number of homicides per gun violence that we haven't hit before in this community. And that's true. We're going through a time where that is the most pressing public safety issue that we face. But we should need to put that in context as well, which is to say that, this is an increase in homicide rates is not unprecedented. And we've seen it in the past go back down. From 2013 to 2014, we saw an increase in homicide rates in Portland of 84%, only to have it go back down to its lowest level ever in 2016. So I know we can get there. I know we can go back. We're experiencing quite a time in terms of a surge. But we can go back. And again, when you look at Portland nationally, we're the 27th largest city in the country. We don't crack the top 50 in terms of homicide rates in terms of cities in the country. It's a crisis for us right now, and it's true, and we need to put all our attention and focus to it. But I know we can get to the rates that we want to see and return this community to what it's historically been, which is a very safe city.
Well, I want to hear a little bit more about coordination strategies across these agencies here, U.S. Attorney's Office, Portland Street Response, the Portland Police Bureau, and the DA's office. I mean, tell us a little bit more about how you all are working together to, reduce crime and also create more, and to work more collaboratively around this. Chief Lavell, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. We for a long time have been in close partnership with the DA's office, U.S. Attorney's Office. Street Response is a newer partner at the table, but we do a lot of work together and under the kind of public safety system in the city. We convene tables where we meet and talk about gun violence. We participate in several community-based type efforts around prosecution. DA Schmidt mentioned Nathan Vasquez, one of the folks in his office that's really been a great partner for us in dealing with some of the chronic livability neighborhood stuff too throughout the years. And our program now on gun violence is really ramping up because of the rise we've seen here in Portland. We rolled out the ECST, Enhanced Community Safety Team, this year, which is a partnership that we have with the federal government. And that's been helpful in getting us some additional resources to investigate some of the gun violence that we've seen. And also Street Response. We're really hopeful that Street Response can evolve into a program that takes some of the load off of Portland police officers. If they can respond to a segment of that folks in mental health crisis that doesn't require a police officer to come, we're supportive of that. I know our behavioral health unit, our folks out at East Precinct during their pilot in Lentz, were very well connected, trying to figure out the best ways we can partner and work together.
And Robin, I wanted to hear a little bit more about that. You know, how does sort of a unarmed response service like Portland Street Response, what role do you see PSR playing in coordination with traditional law enforcement?
The Portland Street Response is responding to issues where there's no crime present, or there could be some level of misdemeanor perhaps present, but a person doesn't want to make charges against an individual. And so for us, we have been working, we have a monthly meeting set up with the commander of the East Precinct and the lieutenant that's over the behavioral health unit to discuss our protocols of if we do arrive on scene, which isn't often, but if we do arrive on scene together, how do we co-respond and how do we handle the situation, who takes the lead? Our team also meets monthly separately with the behavioral health unit, just as Chief Lavell had indicated, and we talk about what individuals we might be crossing over and overlapping in terms of who we're both seeing. And that's been actually a really fruitful conversation and a great partnership. In addition to that, we have actually, DA Schmidt and his team have actually come out and done a ride along with Portland Street Response. And we've started that conversation about what does collaboration look like. As I mentioned, we tend to, if we are going to be responding to anything that's of criminal sorts, it's going to be more of a misdemeanor level. And certainly DA Schmidt has an investment in seeing a reduction of misdemeanors on his caseload as well. So these are some of the conversations we're having, and I think they've been a good start, and we should be building on them.
And Scott, I'd like to hear from you now.
Yeah, thank you. For us, and for those of us in law enforcement, I think partnerships are the #1 priority. And last year, frankly, partnership with the city of Portland and the federal law enforcement group was challenging. And it was political, and I'm glad we're beyond that now and again working together. Our law enforcement is attacking violent crime and with all of our partners, the FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, Portland Police Bureau, MCSO, City of Gresham. We all work together in what we call the Portland Area Crime Gun Initiative. And that's an umbrella group that has been actively involved in the sort of street level response that the chief talked about with the Enhanced Community Safety Team, as well as the Metro Safe Streets Task Force. And that group meets, and we've heard of Nathan Vasquez and 2 of the assistant U.S. attorneys in our office. They meet regularly to discuss each shooting. They meet regularly to make decisions about where cases should appropriately be brought. Should they be brought in the DA's office or should they be brought in our office? So we are working together with the Multnomah County DA's office very closely on a weekly basis to really focus on where we should be marshaling our efforts. The other area that has been of benefit to all of us is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms tactical unit and a tool that we have now called NIBIN. And NIBIN is a machine that analyzes shell casings. And one of the, as you've seen in photos in the Oregonian and other places, some of these shootings, when the PPB goes out, there's 50 or more shell casings on the street. And the NIBIN is really an invaluable tool to analyze each one of these shell casings and really start to focus on, and now the analysis then links a gun to a shell casing. And the ability then is for us to know what firearm is being used in what crimes, and are firearms being shared, so that one gun is being used in multiple firearm incidents. And that effort's ongoing. It's challenging because of the backlog that is existing in the testing process, but we're all working on that together, and I think it's going to really help. One of the things, though, that I want to finish with here is that all the partners I've mentioned have really committed to doing more. Our next PAC-G meeting, as we call it, is coming up at the end of this month, and I anticipate at the end of that meeting, each of the partners in that meeting that we've heard from already are going to raise their paddle and say, we will dedicate more resources. DA Schmidt and I have had many conversations on this. I've agreed, and I've asked my criminal chief, Craig Gabriel, to increase the amount of capacity that we have to bring prosecutions for felon in possession of a firearm. And Craig is now dedicating at least one additional AUSA to that function alone, and that's here in Portland. I know Mike, and I'll let him talk about it. I know he's going to be dedicating additional personnel to that same project. But each one of the partners, including all of our federal partners, are also going to be dedicating for a finite period of time and taking resources away from other work that they do to focus on gun violence here in Portland and public safety here in the local area.
Thank you. Robin, I want to turn back to Portland Street Response. And as we all know, it's been it's been going through this year-long pilot, and it's set to expand, citywide. Can you tell us a little bit more about, how fast this expansion will take place? And, and then, I think importantly as well, how quickly will that expansion, will we start seeing results in terms of not only the work that you're doing, but sort of taking some of the pressure and the workload off of the Portland Police Bureau?
Yeah, thank you for that. So we actually just added a second shift this last week. On last Thursday through Sunday, I went out and worked, and I actually went out with them on our first night. So really exciting. Now we have two shifts that can cover and we actually also expanded our geography. So now we're not just in the greater Lentz area, we're actually all over the East Precinct, which is about a 36 square mile radius. We're already seeing about a 42% increase in our calls from where we were the week before that. So really exciting. In addition to that, we actually also have a fall bump proposal in front of council right now that would add an additional 4 vans. So that would give us a total of 6 vans across the city, 3 in the daytime and 3 in the evening. It still would not get us to 24/7 coverage, but it would get us citywide. So if that passes, then we're looking at that, starting to recruit for those additional 4 vans in January of 2022. And they would hit the streets and go live in March of 2022. So really exciting. On top of that, we also will be putting together our full budget proposal starting next January for the next fiscal year, which is intended to give us full citywide expansion at a 24/7 level. And so I think it's pretty clear that probably by 2022, you can expect Portland Street Response to be everywhere at 24/7 level.
And are there barriers that you're facing to expansion at this time? I mean, both, I want short-term and long-term. I mean, this is still a relatively new project, and yeah, there's just sort of a lot of uncertainties and unknowns going forward. So tell us a little bit about that too.
I don't know if I'd call them barriers. I would just call them maybe steps in the process, right? So we'll need to go through labor negotiations with both PPA and PFFA, that's our police and fire unions. As we shift workload away from them, they'll have to agree to those workload types. And so part of that will be an expansion in the call types. Right now, we have a very narrow set of call types that we can go on. Even with that, though, Portland State University projected that we could divert about 17,000 calls from police just with the current criteria that we're using. But I anticipate that we could actually divert quite a bit more when we expand our call types to be able to go into residences and to be able to go and address suicide calls. So those are sort of the next steps in terms of diverting more calls from police. But the other step that we need to definitely address, and it's being addressed, is with BOIC. So BOIC is our Bureau of Emergency Communications. They're our 911 call center, and they have to build up the infrastructure in order to be able to support additional units across the city for Portland Street Response. And for a dedicated dispatcher, which both police and fire each have their own dedicated dispatchers, Portland Street Response currently does not. And that having a dedicated dispatcher will allow us to go citywide. It will allow us to go 24/7, but it takes 18 to 24 months to train a dedicated dispatcher. So that's what BOIC has been busy doing for this past year. And by March of 2022, Portland Street Response will have a dedicated dispatcher. And then other than that, it just comes down to council, right? Council approving our budget requests to expand. So those are really the three areas: the labor negotiations with the unions, BOIC building out the infrastructure, and then council just giving us the approval to expand.
And I would like to quickly turn to the topic of public safety infrastructure and staffing within the Portland Police Bureau and the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. So Chief Lavell, you first. As the Oregonian reported just this week, Portland Police Bureau staffing right now is at a 30-year low, even though the city's grown by more than 160,000 people during that time. Today, there are roughly 789 sworn officers with the Portland Police Bureau. And that's in terms of police per capita, that's far smaller than even comparable size cities around the US. But I think one thing that a lot of people don't recognize is while there's 789 sworn officers, fewer than half of those right now are working patrol in the city's 3 precincts that must be staffed 24/7. I hope you just wanted to ask for you to sort of explain why during this historic sort of staffing shortage, why is less than half of the sworn officers working patrol right now?
Yeah, we're at 788 sworn personnel total. So that's all ranks from chief down to the newest officer. We do have, some divisions within the police bureau that are needed to keep the machine running, if you will. Our training division, to keep our training requirements met, to train new people as they come on board. And then we have a division which investigates crimes that patrol officers are out taking reports on. And there's just some infrastructure that is built into police agencies to manage the calls that come in, the investigations, the training that needs to be done. But we're a very lean organization. I think Seattle's probably the best comp for us in the Northwest, and they're around 1,200 officers right now, and they've seen historic departures as we have here too, but they still have around 400 more sworn folks than we do. And I think, for us, we've made a lot of adjustments to try to address our ability to answer 911 calls. Earlier this year in February, we rolled our narcotics division, our K9 unit, and our traffic division into patrol to help answer calls for service. Last year, we rolled our gun violence reduction team, our transit unit, and our youth services division back into patrol to answer 911 calls as well after they were cut. So we've made a lot of adjustments that have taken away from what we traditionally had as specialty units to really try to address the shortage for call answering bodies. But I think, for us, we really need to focus on ways to rebuild the organization and get more bodies through the door. We're facing historic retirements at this time as well. We brought on a lot of cops in the 90s to deal with, spikes that Portland was dealing with then around gun violence, gangs, drugs. And those folks who came in then are leaving our agency now. So we have a kind of a retirement cliff, if you will, coming up in July too, where we're expecting a large number of retirements. So we're looking at ways to address that by hopefully getting support for a retire rehire program to retain some of those officers. And also, we're looking at ways where we can reduce call load to give the officers that we currently have more flexibility and more time to answer the calls that are coming in.
I mean, so you just said, Chief Lavell, 788 sworn officers, fewer than half of those right now are on patrol. I mean, what is the minimum level of staffing the Police Bureau believes it needs at this moment? And also tell us, how do you determine what that minimum number should be?
Sure, a lot of times there's been different studies and things of that nature. I think the FBI had a number out at one time that talked about 2 officers per 100,000, something like that, but or 2 officers per 1,000, which would have us close to 100 officers. But I think for us, really, I think the best driver is calls for service. I think in Portland, we've enjoyed many years of low violent crime. And I think we were able to kind of use that number to justify having a small amount of police officers. But I think the spike that we've seen in the last year and a half has really, really exposed that that's an issue for us. And I think if you look at the calls for service, I think that's probably a much better measure of how big a police department a city needs. And, like the Oregonian article had stated, we've seen really, really large increases in population here in the last, 10, 15 years. And we've had essentially a shrinking police department for a lot of that time. So we're really now trying to catch up. And part of the struggle is it takes time, for us to go through a background investigation to actually get someone hired can take up to 6 months. And there's also the fact that we have to send everyone to DPSST down in Salem to get trained and certified. So we're dependent on their ability to roll out classes, our ability to get seats in those classes. And then there's an 18-month probation on the back end after an officer is hired as well. So you're looking at potentially a 2-year lead up to getting an officer who's able to work the street off probation to replace someone else.
I mean, so what I'm hearing from you, Chief Lavell, is you can't just wave a wand and add 150, 200, 300 new officers overnight. And in fact, what I'm hearing from you here is if you wanted to even try to grow the Bureau by 300 staff members, which is a number that's been is getting thrown about right now, we're talking years to do that. This isn't something that's going to happen in the next 6 months.
Absolutely. And we didn't get here overnight either. We've been trending this direction for some time. But I think when you think of hundreds of officers coming in the door, it will take years because it takes, as I laid out, that amount of time to actually go through the processes of getting someone able to work on their own. And then you factor in attrition on that you still have to cover. And it's a years long process to get to where we need to be.
And DA Schmidt, I wanted to ask you, I mean, a lot of the public conversation right now is around sort of the historically low staffing for Portland Police. But, I'm aware that the district attorney's office has been arguably understaffed for years now. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about staffing and personnel issues that your office faces.
Yeah, a lot of what Chief Lavell said, the story is I think similar for us. That we are a very, as cities of our size and counties of our size, because of course I'm a county agency, we're a very safe community, and we've really benefited from that for a long time, and that has allowed or enabled, I think, folks to county commissions to not continue to fund the district attorney's office level at higher rates or comparable rates to other cities our size. So for example, if I look down at San Francisco, and the city and the county of San Francisco is contiguous and their population size is almost identical to ours. They have approximately 150 deputy district attorneys in their office for the same size population we have. We have about 75. So it depends on, of course, there are other comparables you could pull, but I think you have to look at places that have major metropolitan areas, major cities, and make those comparisons. So yeah, we certainly feel the pressure. And like I said, for us, and I know it's the same for the chief, that means that my deputies, I just saw Kate Molina is one of our, one of our deputies that handles homicides and higher level crimes. She just got called out for the 7th time this past week, to respond to the scene in the middle of the night of a homicide. So what used to happen once or twice or 3 times a year is now happening once or twice a month in terms of deputies being called out to scenes for those who carry that type of caseload. Caseload sizes across our units, especially our domestic violence unit, have about doubled from where they were. And that's a combination of factors. The backlog, which we've already talked about, is one complicating factor there. And then just the increase in some of the violent crime that we've seen. So yeah, absolutely. These are real challenges for us. We'd like to get down, because we know that when our caseloads are right sized, that means our supervisors have the time and the bandwidth to supervise, and that our attorneys have the bandwidth and the time to spend time with victims and to make sure that we don't drop any balls. So we're working towards what kind of decisions can we make by prioritizing the highest, most serious level crimes to get to those staffing levels. But we are, as you compare to other cities, I would say understaffed.
And we've got time for just one more question. So I want to quickly and finally transition to the topic of police reform. It is so clear from both the overwhelming support that our police accountability measure received from voters last year that people want more community police officers that are accountable, transparent, equitable in their policing practices. So Chief Lavell, what is the latest on implementation of these practices across the Bureau? And how are you continuing to partner with the federal government on reform measures, which has been a topic for years?
Yeah, we are reforming. We've been engaged in reforms for a long time here at the Portland Police Bureau. We're no stranger to it. We've been in a long settlement agreement with the Department of Justice around police reform. We spent the last few weeks in mediation, looking at ways where we could get back into compliance with our settlement agreement. Matter of fact, later today, we'll meet with a judge, Judge Simon, on that particular topic. We've instituted things like ABLE, active bystandership for law enforcement, which really speaks to the culture of being able to speak up and have voice when you see things going wrong. And it gives officers tools and empowerment to step into situations where they see things going wrong. We're looking at making changes to our training division, like the mayor had stated, bringing in a civilian person to work as the academic dean and really take an adult education kind of model and embed it into our training that we've done. Typically, we have a captain at the police bureau who runs the training division, and we have turnover there as that person promotes or retires. So we're looking to really make that change. And I think the FIT team, we've had several iterations of gun violence task force, gun violence reduction team, gang.
Lavell, I just want to interrupt you. You said FIT. You got to explain for folks what FIT is.
Oh, sure. It's a focus intervention team. That is our new team we're rolling out to address gun violence. And a component of that is the FIT COG, Focus Intervention Team Community Oversight Group. So having some civilian participation and collaboration in how we roll out this work, we're hoping will make it more sustainable than our previous efforts and really give the community some voice in how we're doing that work. So there's a lot of reforms happening at the Police Bureau. We realize we're in a time of change in this profession, and we're looking at ways to partner and go about making thoughtful changes that are going to be good for the community.
And Scott, lastly, is there anything you want to add from the federal perspective on police reforms within the Portland Police Bureau?
We applaud all the work that's been done by Chief Lavell and the PPB in the city to do police reform. As he mentioned, there is this long-standing court-ordered settlement agreement. We'll both be going to see Judge Simon later today to hear his thoughts on the mediation that has been taking place. But they have made real strides, and that includes both with the agreement to use body-worn cameras and the Community Oversight Board, which as Chief just discussed. So I'm pleased with the state of the mediation, and I think we're on the right track with Portland's reforms with police.
Well, thank you all to all of our panelists. I've got to turn this back over to Andrew Hone because I think we're close to running out of time, unfortunately. But thank you all very much.
Yeah, I have to just say, for those who are tuning in and watching, we have not even made it through our sort of initial set of questions here. And I think the reason why is because the unpacking of the information around public safety is obviously layered, and the questions we're having here, we're not disaggregated from the rest of the country. And in no small part is Portland exemplary of the challenges we're all facing, especially in major metropolitan regions. So I just want to pause and just say thank you. The level of expertise here and thoughtfulness of your responses is outstanding. And I just think our members have consumed this information, appreciate it. And also, I just want to acknowledge a few things too. Thank you for your service. It's interesting as seeing the ARC, for example, of street response. The Portland Business Alliance was there at the announcement of its formation years ago before COVID. And it's just to hear about the transition of street response into a future that is citywide is so exciting in this moment. So just Robin, to you and your entire team, of course, congratulations. To Chief Lavell, to DA Schmidt, to our U.S. Attorney, I just want to say thank you so much for your responses today and just allowing us to see a little bit under the hood and understand the challenges that each of you are facing. Let's be very honest here. You serve a critical part, not the only part of public safety, but a critical aspect of it. And I just want to acknowledge too, we have a very lengthy set of questions in our Q&A. And I just want to tell everybody who asked these questions that we will be putting this out as we always do. Sometimes we have moments at the end of these forums that allow us to just open it up to these questions. I usually moderate in these questions. I actually think there's a great set of these here. We will get these out to the panelists that see if they can respond, give us a moment or two to try and collect their responses where appropriate, and appreciate that you engaged with us today in a thoughtful way. And of course, to Shane, we appreciate your moderation of this. I know that you have had a great sort of history on your own beats of covering crime, both here and back in New York City. So just appreciate that you have also that knowledge base too that you presented today. So for those of us in attendance, just give you a big virtual round of applause to these folks and just thank you for your service to our community and making it a safer and better place. So thank you. And I do want to just take a moment to recognize and go back to our original sponsors, KeyBank and the Portland Trib. We appreciate you making this all possible. And to all those who joined us today for this important conversation, thank you so much. And we appreciate it. And with that, we will sign off and say, see you next time. To our panelists again, thank you. To our moderator, thank you. And everybody out there in a virtual world, have a great day.